Yes! Sowas soll ich nicht mehr. Was Pishishi Bashira. Tira Christina Nestlero. Da, Beckerastina Strata. Hello guys, Chromosome Excel here. About to read a fanfic of epic proportions. But before that, I gotta say something. I'm sorry. I've been making any videos for probably about 3 days or so. People complain like, hey, you ain't making any videos. I'm like, okay, cool. I've been busy, work, and such. Why are you caring so much? Why are you crying? My videos aren't that good anyways. Why cry over rotten milk that's been spilled on your coffee table or whatever you have? I mean, thank God you didn't drink that rotten milk, because if you drink that rotten milk, you've been sick, you've been puking everywhere, probably crying, like, oh, my stomach, ugh. And I'd be like, damn, you drink some rotten milk, you're gonna be okay. But then I'd be lying if you're gonna be okay by drinking rotten milk. You're screwed. But anyways, other than that, instead of me just talking about some rotten milk that doesn't exist, let's start reading this fanfic called Improper Punishment. Okay, let's do this. The door to the farmhouse was pushed open by an exhausted Applejack. She barely had the strength to kick the door closed behind her as she exhaled a relieved sigh. Another day of apple bucking out of the way. Eager to give her aching joints a break, she headed towards her bedroom for a well-deserved nap. Since her room was in the far back of the farmhouse, she had to pass by every pony else's room on her way. Big Macintosh was visiting family in Appaloosa, so his room was vacated, and Granny Smith fell asleep long before the sun even began to set. The last room she passed was Apple Bloom's, and the door was cracked just enough for Applejack to peek inside. She spotted Apple Bloom laying in bed, licking a lollipop that she held between both hooves. However, despite her candy taste and candy treat, she didn't look very happy at all. Surmising that she and her friends had another Cutie Mark Crusader failure, Applejack felt obligated to take the time necessary to confront her sister. Her nap would have to wait. She gently knocked on the door before peering inside and asking, "May I come in?" Startled, Apple Bloom jerked upward, giving her sister a nervous look. But she didn't abandon her lollipop long enough to answer. Like all big sisters, Applejack came in without even waiting for permission. She trotted over next to the bed, hopped up, and sat down next to Apple Bloom. "I noticed you're looking pretty miserable there. Anything wrong, Sugar Cube?" Apple Bloom was still working ventrally on her lollipop, shook her head. Applejack was not convinced. "Now you know that ain't true. Tell me what's bothering you." "Ain't nothing," Apple Bloom muttered out past her working tongue. The orange mare furrowed her eyebrows and snatched the lollipop away from her sister. Oh my God. Setting it on the bedside table. "It ain't nothing with y'all. Now tell your big sister what's troubling ya. Apple Bloom shifted uncomfortably, then turned away to stare at the wall. Please, just leave me alone. Applejack remained adamant. She reached out with her hoof to make Apple Bloom face her. However, as she did so, Apple Bloom uncharacteristically snaked out her sorry. Apple Bloom uncharacteristically snaked her tongue out and dragged it across Applejack's hoof. What? Applejack, startled, jerked her hoof away. What in tarnation? Stop that! I can't! Apple Bloom muttered, looking ashamed. You can't? Applejack questioned. She stared at her quizzifically, trying to lock her gaze with Apple Bloom's evasive eyes. Her suspicion began to grow when she noticed the nervous beads of sweat running down Apple Bloom's brow. Okay, what in hay is going on? Apple Bloom bit her lip nervously. I don't want to say. Apple Bloom, you tell me right now, Applejack demanded, stomping her hoof in the covers. Apple Bloom sighed. She knew her sister would not back down until she exposed her dirty little secret. So, to getting in more trouble than she already was, she pulled her covers back to reveal a brand spanking new cutie mark. Oh, okay. It was a cutie mark, the likes that Applejack had never seen before. A horse tongue licking a lollipop? However, the way Apple Bloom was reacting to what should be a special moment in a young mare's life gave Applejack a suppression that something was not quite right. Oh, failing with reading. Oh, I'm failing now. Oh, don't fail, Kai. We believe in you. Apple Bloom, how did you get this cutie mark? She asked. Apple Bloom stuttered, incapable of telling her sister the truth. Thoughts began to swim in Applejack's mind until a dominant one looped at the forefront. You used the heart's desire again, didn't you? Applejack neighed. Apple Bloom winced at her sister's sharp tone. Having been found out, she quickly admitted the truth. I thought I could do it right this time. Apple Bloom, Apple Bloom, Apple Bloom. Applejack glared at her. You couldn't learn your lesson the first time, could you? She looked at her sister's cutie mark again. It was quite a strange cutie mark, to be sure, and not exactly a talent any pony would likely be proud of. When she thought about it, what kind of special talent was licking lollipops anyways? You realize I'm gonna have to punish you for this, right? Apple Bloom stared down at the sheet. I know. However, Applejack wasn't quite sure how to do so. She never had to punish Apple Bloom for something like this before. Were regular methods even going to work? The cutie mark starving filly had already done it once, so how could she make sure she would never do it again? She began to toss ideas around in her head, until she suddenly remembered something. She recalled how Apple Bloom licked her hoof, seemingly incapable of controlling her tongue. Oh no. This is not going where I think it is. That was when she realized a perfect plan. Oh shoot, it is. Oh shoot, it is. No, it's gonna go. Oh, it's gonna go. Oh. Here we go, guys. With a twang of excitement, she demanded, "I'll be right back, Apple Bloom. Don't leave your room." With that, Applejack hopped off the bed and raced out the door, a devious smirk across her muzzle. Oh. Apple Bloom, knowing she was in deep trouble, sighed audibly. She gazed at her half-eaten lollipop on the nightstand and decided at the very least she could get a little enjoyment out of her predicament. She grabbed it and began to ladle it with attention as she waited for Applejack's return. She was just about ready to start on her second lollipop she stashed away in her drawer when her sister returned. 4 lengths of rope were coiled around her neck as she trotted up to the bed. The rope was then dripped across the wooden frame of the bed. "Don't fight what I'm about to do," Applejack warned, grabbing one of the lengths of rope and tying it around the little filly's right hind leg. "What are you doing?" Apple Bloom demanded in a nervous tone as her leg was bound to the bedpost. "This is part of your punishment, Apple Bloom," was all her sister replied as she started on the other trembling hind leg. Although Apple Bloom was less than cooperative, years of apple bucking had left Applejack with a powerful, robust physique, allowing her to easily overpower her squirming sister. Before long, all 4 of Apple Bloom's legs were tied to the supposing bedposts, leaving her in a compromising spread eagle position on the bed. What the hell is a spread eagle position? I'll look up later. With Apple Bloom properly restrained, Applejack hopped off the bed and headed over to the door, shutting it tight. Then she trotted over to a nearby window and closed the blinds. She wanted to ensure that no pony would be able to see or hear what she was about to do. Return to the. Oh my God! This is rough. I'm already. My imagination is like flourishing in my head right now, and it just gives me bad thoughts everywhere. There's nothing but bad thoughts. Bad thoughts. Returned to the mattress, she straddled her sister's chest as she spoke. since y'all can't seem to learn your lesson, then I'm afraid I'm gonna have to get rough with ya. Apple Bloom whimpered a bit, her ears tucked back and looking legitimately apologetic. I'm sorry, sis. Please don't punish me. Normally, Applejack might have believed that. She's usually pretty lenient with her sister, despite how much trouble she gets into sometimes. However, she has something more in mind than mere punishment, and the only way for her to get away with it was to be absolutely strict for once. With her mind made up, she decisively shook her head and said, "Too late for apologies, Apple Bloom. Now I'm taking no joy in this, but it has to be done." Applejack then stood up and Applejack then stood up and turned around so that she was facing away from her sister. Okay. What's happening here? Apple Bloom was now staring at her sister's straw-colored tail and the round outline of her muscular hind end. Bad thoughts. Moments later, her tail came up. The tail came up, which exposed her sister's blooming vulva. In its fullest glory to Apple Bloom, causing the little filly to flush with embarrassment and speak out, "What are you doing, sis?" "Well, since your special talent is licking lollipops," I see where this is going. I'm gonna make you lick my lollipop. Now this one might not taste like cherries anymore. It hadn't in a while. But you don't get to be picky, Applejack explained. Apple Bloom mentally scrambled for a proper response, but any attempt to speak was quickly muffled by her sister, who shamelessly lowered her hunches to curl the to curl the filly's snout between her thighs. I gotta calm down before I freak out. As expected, Apple Bloom's wet tongue snaked forward on its own volition and quickly began to lap away at her sister's presented orifice. Wow, you're just using a lot of those words, aren't you, boy? It caused Applejack's thighs to tense until they trembled. Her lower muscles fluttered in her abdomen as Apple Bloom's tongue began to pleasure her in ways only her closet mare friends had pleasured her before. Yet despite her sister's inexperience, her tongue moved with a grace that none of her mare friends could match. Well, it was her talent. While her special talent may have been a fake, it didn't mean she wasn't ever so good at it. Apple Bloom didn't share in her thrill, however. She was utterly terrified, more so about her limited oxygen intake than anything else, and it caused her to tug on her restraints in desperation. She screamed, but the pressure and presence of her sister's hunches left her distressed, muffled, and unintelligible, completely ignored by her preoccupied big sister. Since Apple Bloom had no control over her tongue's actions, Applejack knew it would be pointless to order her around. Instead, she used her own motions to guide Apple Bloom's tongue where she wanted it to go, which in this case it was over her swollen clitoris. She gasped breathlessly as her most sensitive area was assaulted by the most skilled tongue in all of Equestria, as she prematurely squirted all over her sister's snout. Oh my god. Oh man. Apple Bloom splattered fiercely as some of it leaked into her nostrils. The odor overpowered her. It was a strong, musky odor and with a faint hint of apples, although it sure didn't taste like apples. Oops, sorry sis, Applejack apologized, though she made no effort to clean it up. As the scent overwhelmed Apple Bloom, she began to feel a strange, tingling sensation between her legs. It was a feeling she both feared and welcomed. For while she didn't understand it, she couldn't deny how good it felt. Regardless, she was incapable of indulging in any considering the way indulge it. Sorry guys. Regardless, she was incapable of indulging it any considering. What the heck? It says, I'm gonna read it how it's written. Regardless, she was incapable of indulging in any considering the way her hooves were tied. So she was forced to endure it for the time being. Man, that part was like twisted. I couldn't read that part properly. As for Applejack, although the fire between her legs was being properly stroked, she still needed more and began to grind her pussy lips against Apple Bloom's muzzle. She bit back her gasp. Granny Smith was sleeping in the next room, and she didn't want to risk waking her. While the elderly mare was a very sound sleeper, she couldn't risk her discovering the taboo she was indulging in against her sister's will. She was referred from making too much noise. But that's no fun. As Apple Bloom's tongue guided itself across her sister's slit, she could feel it beginning to stain. She wanted desperately to stop, but there was nothing she could do. The cutie mark born of the cutie parks forced her to perform the enacted talent, whether she wanted to or not. She knew this, of course, but she was willing to take the risk anyways. She was at least hoping that with a smaller dose, she would only end up with one cutie mark instead of dozens. It apparently worked, but the downside was the cutie mark was rather disappointing. Yet the last thing she expected was for this to be used like this. Applejack failed to hold back her last gasp, distracting Apple Bloom from her thoughts and making her fully aware in both her sexual and physical discomfort. She whimpered in desperation while this last which this time solicited a response from Applejack. Just a little more, Apple Bloom. A little more until what, she thought. The end of this torture, she hoped. Applejack, her face dreaded in sweat, felt her entire body go stiff as she finally reached her peak. A powerful surge of electric pleasure knocked her off her feet, causing her to collapse against her sister's face and snout, smothering her completely. Oh, she could no longer stand up, even if she wanted to, as she was lost in the most powerful orgasm she had ever experienced in her life. Apple Bloom was helpless beneath her sister, as her face was drenched in fresh lubricant. That seemingly flooded her mouth. Wow. It tasted awful, causing her stomach to turn. Yet, that was the least of her worries, as her oxygen supply had now been cut off completely. In her panic, tears began to stream down her face as she cried out her sister's name. Oh shoot. While the orange mare's orgasm only lasted a few seconds, it felt like an eternity to her. And when she finally came out of her high, she was left sore and extremely exhausted. Unfortunately, her sister's tongue was still lashing away at her sensitive spot, and she was forced to her hooves prematurely, not able to hold her footing for long. She tumbled forward and took a long moment to catch her breath before standing up again. She turned to face her sister, who was gasping desperately for the air her lungs had been temporarily denied. She was absolutely dreaded, and by more than just the orange mare's spunk. The sweat from both had terminally between their chests, leaving Apple Bloom's fur matted down all the way from her waist up to her snout. And even in a few places beyond, her hair had also been fuzzled from all of the smothering Applejack had put it through. Her filthy, crying form made the apple. I said apple. Her filthy, crying form made the Orm mare feel somewhat ashamed, but not nearly enough to regret her decision. "Can I be untied now?" Apple Bloom pleaded, sniffling. Applejack shook her head. "Nope, I want you to lie there and think about what you did while I go fetch your cure. Maybe if you're sorry enough when I return, I'll untie you, maybe." Applejack then hopped off the bed and galloped out the door, closing the door behind her. Apple Bloom was left alone with only her thoughts and a raging inferno between her legs as company. End of chapter 1, basically. I'll finish the rest of it later.